Last week, Ben attempted to explain how he got into all this debt problems in the first place as part of that story. This is what he said.
One thing you've probably been hearing a lot is that the Bush tax cuts contributed by lowering the amount of revenue coming into the government. But that's not true.
But one viewer disagrees, saying the facts were misrepresented. So tonight we're responding and hitting reply all.
Lisa emailed in response to my reality check on the debt, and she wasn't happy with what she heard. Here's a portion of what she had to say. I would say that news organizations who dumb down, oversimplify the news in order to create an illusion of balance, or what I call faux balance, in the guise of complete fact-checking, is a major reason the public is so misinformed. So what did I misinform you about? Well, Lisa says when I say the revenues under President Bush rose even after the Bush tax cuts is, quote, wholly inaccurate because the only honest and accurate measure of revenue is a percentage of GDP. Revenue has averaged 18% of GDP since 1970. It was below 15% though as Bush left office, says Lisa. So let's take a look at Lisa's statements. First, that revenue has averaged 18% of GDP since 1970. That is true. And it's also true that it was below 15% as President Bush left office. But what Lisa doesn't take into account is that when President Bush left office, we were in the midst of a recession caused by the housing crisis and the Wall Street mess. So let's talk about the whole story. Take a look at this graph. It's from the Congressional Budget Office, and it shows you the past 30 years from 1981 all the way through the projected 2012. It shows revenue percentage of GDP. It's the standard that Lisa says I should have used. Now, Lisa says that the 40-year average for percentage of revenue to GDP is 18%. Well, take a look at this. In 2006, 3 years after the Bush tax cuts went into effect, revenue was 18.4% of GDP under President Bush. That is in line with where we were a decade before under President Clinton. In 1995, we were at 18.5%. And a decade before that, in 1987, under President Reagan, we were at 18.4%. Now, Lisa also states this, that revenue as a share of GDP was lower every single year of the Bush presidency than it was in 2000. Again, that statement is true, but not the whole story. And to tie that to the Bush tax cuts, well, it's questionable because 2000 was an anomaly. Again, let's go back to that graph from the CBO. Revenue to GDP was higher in 2000 than it was in any year in the past 30 years. Revenue percentage to GDP ratio does not begin to rise again until after the Bush tax cuts have gone into effect. 05, 06, 07. The housing and Wall Street crisis of 2008 then ends that streak. So here's what you need to know. There is one more thing on that graph that you need to see. In the past 30 years, we've had only 4 years when our tax revenue to GDP percentage surpassed our expenses percentage to GDP. Those years were 98, 99, 2000, and 2001. Lisa says I'm oversimplifying the issue. The bottom line, though, is that our problem is pretty simple. As long as we as a nation are spending and borrowing more money, or in this case, vastly more than we take in, the country is in serious trouble. And that is Reality Check.
You can see the chart for yourself. It is posted at the end of this story, which is in the Reality Check section of our website, fox19.com. You can also comment on the story on Ben's Facebook page. Just search Ben Swan, WXIX.